guys for clapping for me. Just for me, right? Awesome. My name's Clayton Davis. I'm the Senior Awards Editor at Variety, which is number 5. It's a good movie to watch. I love it very much. I'm so glad that the world is experiencing what I feel like only I knew in August when I first saw it, and now the secret's getting out. It's great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call some people who I met in the hallway and said, I'll come in and talk to some people that just saw your movie. They said yes. All right? So first up, he's in one of the great actors of today, I guess I can kind of describe him as. He's been in some of my favorite movies for the last 25 years, and he's still killing it on a daily basis, ladies and gentlemen. Peter Sarsgaard. All part of the ambiance.
I don't know, I got hot.
And lastly, produced this movie, put together an amazing team of director, writer, actors, and there's a lot of credit here, ladies and gentlemen, John Palmer. John, not related to Arnold, right? Like,
not that
that was a topic of conversation the last few days. So I'm so glad to be sitting here with you both because, again, I do really feel like I had the secret. I've been telling people, this movie, September 5 is amazing, it's one of the best ones of the year. And then, it was on the acquisition circuit, came Weird in Venice and Telluride, and now it's coming out this year, and you guys are one of the first to see it, and it seems like I don't have to be alone anymore. So Peter, I have to ask you, let's start with Shattered Glass, Jarhead, Kinsey, Education, most recently Memory. You're like really good at this acting thing, and I think you should do it as a career. What was so different about this experience this time around for you, taking on this role in a story as important as this?
Well, when I first met with Tim, he was talking about cutting the film with all this documentary footage that I then went and looked at. And I saw the bit with Jim McKay. I was like, well, if we have that, then we have a movie. Because to me, Jim McKay really is like the most ethical person in the movie. And I thought it was something people needed to see, that moment. And I think, yeah.
John, be honest with you, when I first walked into the movie, I kind of walked in with my arms crossed because I was like, I've seen Munich. I know this story, and then I was like, oh no, I don't know any of this. Actually, it was very profound when I was watching it the first time this kind of the enemy to us. I actually forgot the most vital part of the movie that's the climax is when everyone thinks that they survived. I literally thought this was like Quentin Tarantino revisionist version for a second, and then just this utter devastation. Why did you, or how did you get people together to make this movie? Because everyone seems to not be wanting to take as many chances anymore in Hollywood the way we would 10 or 12 years ago.
Well, I have to take a moment really quick. This is exciting for me to be here tonight because I moved to LA over 20 years ago, and my very first job was for American Cinematheque. I was a programming assistant. Answering questions.
It's a little different, by the way.
Narrow notes, that's how it was. Yeah. But thank you for humoring me there. This story, it was interesting. This story kind of came about, and we came on board after it was an idea and there was a draft of the script. And so Tim Feldbaum, who directed and co-wrote, was working with German producers, our partners at Berghaus Loka, who brought Tim up and kind of produced his first 2 movies. And it was sort of coming up on the 50th anniversary of these events, and it was a top of mind, I think, in Germany. A lot of people, there was sort of a social reckoning. It was the first time the government acknowledged their errors and apologized for what happened. And so that was sort of what got that ball rolling. And through the research process, lots and lots of research went into this film, obviously, and we joined around that time as the script was getting developed and worked with them. And in interviewing Jeffrey Mason, who's the character that John Magaro plays in the film, it was Tim really who said, wait a minute, this is the story. This very insane behind the scenes things that happen is really the story there. And so I think really at that point it wasn't, everyone just got excited about it. I mean, the same way that Peter did, you know, as the script focused in on that razor sharp perspective about the media and the way that we consume it. It was pretty, you know, everybody was pretty pumped to do it, and we moved pretty quick once we had all of that in place.
Awesome. Speaking with John Magaro yesterday, I'm not name dropping it, it's just what I've seen yesterday. And one of the best qualities of the movie, aside from just the different movies, that it's not even a minute movie, and it's so tight and so great. You like, listen, that's it. There's like not really much. Like there's no like releases some sort of vibe cut. Like that's what is there. Was it always envisioned as like this high pace? Because it also gives you like a bit of agita as you're watching it. Was it always envisioned in that manner to be tight, quick, and to the point?
Absolutely. I think if you've seen Tim's other work, he's done these sort of post-apocalyptic thriller type movies, and so this is you know, a foray into drama, but definitely I think that's just baked into Tim's DNA as a filmmaker, and certainly sort of into the German DNA of efficiency. So I think, yeah, that was always part of the plan. You know, the very first draft of the script, even before it was honed in the way that it is now, you finished it and we're like, what just happened? I just read, you know, 100 pages and can't believe it.
Also, a film is a little bit like a beehive, where, you know, a beehive, the temperament is determined by the queen. So if you want to change the temperament of a beehive, you just kill that queen and put in a new one. Tim has such an intense energy, you know, like he's pacing, he's the hands going through the hair, he's, okay, you know, that he seems like he's shot out of a cannon. So when you go to act for him, you feel like you're being shot out of a cannon. And the way that he films too, he did, you know, like lots of takes where you do the whole scene. He's almost never doing a pickup. So we're all super warm as actors all the time. And it really works for this movie, I think, because it's like we are all responsible for every scene. Doesn't matter how many lines you have. We are all in the room together, so many scenes that you kind of have to get the machine up and going. You know, everyone's got to be like tight on their cues, listening to each other, responding in real time. There's no time for like a long, thoughtful, internal moment.
There's a part in the film where everyone goes outside to see the helicopters when they're taking the hostages to the air base, and I feel like, unfortunately, this still feels incredibly timely. But we watch things on TV, it almost doesn't feel real because it's always inside a box. But then we go outside and they see the helicopters. There's a sense of responsibility or a sense of that it's real. I know Jeff in real life has spoken about that night, like they all went home and cried. Like once everything had settled down, there was a few hours that passed because all that time it was over obviously many hours. It's type 91 minutes, but they all went home and cried. What do you see as like those parallels for today, and how we consume tragedy, media, or the sensationalize?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like who gets to tell the story, and the fact that it needs to be a story. You know, Rune went on to do Dateline, who's a guy from sports, went on to do news. And I think there's this notion that we have, and that they had then, which is that a live camera is somehow more truthful, right? If we're pointing a live camera at the thing, and we're not cutting, we're just watching it, that's gotta be the truth. But of course, anyone who's studied, this guy teaches on deciding where the camera goes, there's a lot of decisions that determine point of view besides it just being live. And now we have, everyone's got a live camera on them. And we have all these different points of view. Everyone thinks that their camera's the truth. And I think figuring out what the communal story is that depict I'm not talking about the nuance, I'm talking about like, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, is something we can't agree on anymore. And this is sort of the beginning of, I think, a different way of watching, a different way of telling stories. And I think it has a lot to do with what's going on today. And obviously the elephant in the room is that the events of the Israelis and the Palestinians in this have a lot to do with what's going on today. I think it's actually something that makes the true topic of the film, which is about journalism, feel very current. And obviously as you know, we made it before Gaza last year. So I think it's made the films, to me, feel more like, oh, we really do have to tackle some of these ideas about journalism, about storytelling, about having history that is common, that we can all agree on.
John, I think you answered this, when we were trying to obtain the footage, I think somebody at CBS was able to go and ask, like, hey, do you have that footage from, they hadn't, they provided it. Was that literally the key to unlocking? Like, without that, does this movie just not happen at all, or would you try to do some like recreations?
We spent years trying to get the rights to all this footage. It was not an easy task. They had it all, but we produced this film independently and made it on a much smaller budget than I think what you see reflects. And it was just getting the rights, getting the yes, but also being able to afford it. So we originally had just planned to recreate everything, that we were going to use it as a reference point and then recreate everything. And once we slowly started inching toward a yes, and then finally got the thumbs up and knew that we could make it work, we were over the moon. I mean, yeah, it made so much of the script feel, as Peter said, when he responded to it, feel so much more urgent and authentic. We did recreate anyone who lost their lives that day. We recreated those pieces of the footage. So anybody who died on September 5, we refilmed that, recreated that, just as a matter of respect. It was important to us to do that. But everything else is that original stuff. So yeah, it was sort of the key to everything. The movie isn't the movie without all of that stuff.
I love the bit with the German guy, that footage. And you start to think about how the German guilt from the Holocaust was why they didn't have, the police weren't carrying weapons, which is why the military couldn't come in with weapons, which is, it's like, that has something to do with it, I think is very interesting. And that particular piece of footage, I think is fascinating to watch somebody wish something were true that's not true.
That piece I actually want to ask about, because when you, Loney, who's by the way is just a fabulous actress, like just all around.
Teacher's Lounge, everybody
Yeah.
knows the Teacher's Lounge.
Her character and her story really becomes almost like the emotional filler, because her goal is to want to wash away the sin of her country, and it's so hard to fathom doing something like that. And when I think about 10 to 15 years from now, when people start writing history books about this time, we're all gonna have like 97 different versions of the events, even though we have the live footage from those events. What was most, for you personally, both of you, what was the goal of making this? Like, obviously you do it for art, but there's gotta be something much more profound that you wanna articulate through art.
To me, it's just an invitation to have a discussion about some of these important issues regarding journalism. I mean, in a thriller, makes the medicine go down, I guess, the thriller. But to me, that's really what it was about. It's not that it asks every question or tries to answer any of them, but to me, this is the kind of thing we should be talking about with a lot of the things that are going on in the world today.
I just, I think for me too, as a producer, it's like you want to make a movie that hopefully makes money and that entertains people, and That's obviously, you know, a big priority every time around, but it's nice when it also can help people think and feel. This movie in particular, I personally have been so affected by the news cycles the last 4, 8, whatever, 10 years. My mental health, like, and, you know, we get so obsessed with it, and we don't have that time to go home and cry because it's just constantly going and going and going and going. And so I think a lot about the things that this movie, you know, thinks about too. And for me, that's definitely what drew me in. It was like the constant cycle of information and the way that we consume it, and, you know, whether it's true or not. Our need for just constant, current, up-to-date information. It's like if something, you learn about something that happened 5 minutes ago, it's old news. There's a direct line between what happened this day and where we're sitting right now.
And that's what gets them into trouble in the movie, you know, is that they jump too fast instead of verifying everything. I think for me, the movie also, you know, had that part where what if something violent happens? What are we going to do? Well, it seems so quaint. To me, it's such an innocent question from 1972, because now, of course, many of us have seen people die on television in very graphic ways. You know, Daniel Pearl online you could watch, or the congressman who was shot on live TV. But all that aside, even just like recent events and wars all over the place, we see dead bodies and people getting shot all over the place. And I don't think, for me, it makes me more empathetic for some reason. It makes it seem abstract after a while, after its repeated viewing. You know?
Absolutely. Can we talk about the control room that's built in here? First of all, it looks so hot in there. I mean, you tell me there's just no air conditioning.
It's a lot of spray. That's also Tim Feldbaum. In between every take, he's like, they're not wet enough.
John Garland said that he had been to Madison Square Garden to send the control room to like prep for this. And he said that people were looking at him like, you just want to watch a sports game. What did you do to prep for this role? Did you stop at
I knew a little bit of it. My friend Tico covers NHL and the Olympics, and actually for years, because I like sports, I've gone and hung out with him. So I knew a little bit, but I was actually doing Presumed Innocent for a TV show I did for like a month and a half. And then I went and shot this in Munich for a month, and then I came back for a month and a half and finished Presumed Innocent. So they seem similar. They are similar. So in terms of preparation, I mean, I learned a lot about Rune. You know, he writes about himself, and he writes some about the events here. But not much more than that, really. I mean, for me, I'm such a script-focused actor that I do preparation. And I know like people like to hear about actors' preparation, but most of my preparation is reading the script over and over and daydreaming about it. That's like pretty much what I do.
For me, the exchange lines of the movie is when you tell Jeff, do a good job today, and he says it was catastrophe, which is so multi-layered and so many different aspects of that day. And then you get like a promotion for it later. It's like this whole like conundrum of you know, you want to advance your career, but you do recognize the faults. John, when you were putting this together, when you saw Tim's vision of what he wanted to do, were you afraid of anyone seeing this as like an invitation, or it's okay to mess up once in a while because then you can actually achieve something? The wrong lesson.
Boy, something else to lose sleep over tonight. I don't know that ever occurred to me. I think that, you know, in this, it's true. I mean, Rune Arledge, who Peter plays, went on to co-lead ABC Sports and ABC News for 20 years. It was the first time anyone led both divisions. And Jim McKay's son, Sean McManus, went on to do the same thing. He was a teenager in the newsroom at this time. And by the way, this broadcast won tons of Emmys. A record number of Emmys, I think, for this exact broadcast that we watched them make. So, yeah, I hope at least that the movie is morally complex enough that nobody's able to kind of extract that message. And I especially, I always think about that last moment we have with Jeff in the car where he finally exhales. And just the weight of all of it on him. And we didn't see him go cry at home, but you feel the weight of that in that moment when he's alone in the car. And so I think and I hope that we've kind of shown you that even if there are wins, at the end of the day, nobody really wins in a situation like this.
Because he's not here, can we say something nice about Ben Chaplin? You could pass on it altogether, but he's just such a good actor.
I actually talk to Ben Chaplin every weekend.
Do you really?
Yeah, because we're both Liverpool soccer fans. So I mean, most of my interaction with Ben is about soccer. I mean, I've known Ben. Ben and I actually share an acting teacher who was one of the great acting teachers, I think, in Hollywood. She passed away. Her name's Penny Allen. Her husband, Charles Lawton, worked with Al Pacino. Was basically Al Pacino's teacher, and we talked a lot about that. Like, if Penny were here, what would she say? What should we do? And it felt to me with Ben and a lot of the rest of the cast, because we don't have in this movie the number one on the call sheet. I mean, there was a number one on the call sheet, but it didn't have anything to do with like hierarchy to me.
That's because you were number one.
It didn't feel that way. I had a nice fairly. But no, it didn't feel like we had, it really is a movie where the load is shared between all of the actors. Everyone has their moment, everyone has their time, and yeah, Ben and I would basically, we were staying at the hotel, we would just hang out every night and drink and talk about the movie. You know?
Ben is the sweetest person you've ever met. He's so lovely and so sweet and so exuberant and so terribly modest for how insanely talented he is. He's just a lovely guy. I mean, Peter's point is not to be understated. Like, this was everybody loved each other. It was such a good vibe. There were no big egos. There was no number one on the call sheet. You're right, Peter. Peter, you know, metaphorically. But it was an amazing thing, and we got so lucky with our cast and our crew, where it was just, we all got along and wanted to make a good movie together, and I felt like, you know, hopefully we did both.
Yeah. And it was nice to shoot it in Munich. I mean, I had this moment right before we were filming where I was just like, sometimes I'm looking for, you know, like the young actor in me was always looking for the divine to come in. When is it going to be like, you know? And I went out to the Olympic grounds on this like little lime scooter thing. It was like way too far to go. And I just stood there, you know, and thought like, this really happened, and it happened right here, and we're in the place where it happened. And even though we're filming, all of my stuff was in Bavarian Studios, which is inside, there's something just about like, and it relates to the movie too, this happened. I mean, this is something we all are struggling with right now. No, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. It's not even like, don't, you know, remember your history so you don't repeat the mistakes. I mean, no one knows what the history is anymore. So I just really tried to get a feeling that this happened. And it was excellent filming there. Aside from our director swimming in the freezing river every morning. He's hardcore. So, you know.
I think he was in the river. It was just like a guy that would just go for a quick dip. No comment. Let's go to Tim's writing with Morris. Again, tight, and I don't know how much. Did anyone write any books about the people that were in the room? Did they write books about what happened?
Oh yeah.
Rune has a chapter in his book.
Yeah, Rune has a little chapter in his autobiography, so does Jim McKay. There's a German scholar who wrote like the definitive book about the media and their role in this day. Unfortunately, it was never translated to English, but it's an incredible like magnum opus of exactly what happened. So a lot of people have written and talked about it. It's just never kind of been presented in an entertaining way.
Of the people you spoke to that were still alive, that were were involved in that day, did you ever get a sense of responsibility? Or did they share that they had a sense of responsibility, especially with the scene of like filming the German police officers on the rooftop? Anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. This is all real footage. I mean, that footage of those in the Jim McKay's voiceover, that's from the original footage. 100%. You know, Jeffrey Mason, who John McGarrell plays, was a huge collaborator with us through the whole movie. He's a co-producer on the movie and is deeply concerned about not the perception of him and of what they did that day, but of their role as journalists and as media and the legacy that they laid.
There were new problems. I mean, the live coverage was a new problem. It was virgin territory. I love the innocence of the questions they're asking, or even the moment where they go like, "Oh, if we're seeing it, they can see it." Yeah, guys. Yeah. But now we all think like that, you know.
And the most clever thing they come up with is like, what if we put the ABC logo in the top right hand corner just leave it there, right? I mean, one of the final questions I can ask you, I believe art is important. I mean, it's so very important that I don't know why we don't have it in schools like consistently everywhere. I feel like every time there are budget cuts, it's the first thing to go, and I don't understand why that's a thing. But I also do feel that with an artist, any artist that tackles any type of art, they leave a piece of themselves on it. That there's something there that you're like, I feel like that's me. I contribute that title, moment, character, line. What is that for you? What did you contribute to this? What's the role for you?
I mean, I just work really hard. I really love what I do. I show up, I think, every day like not ready to agree just to make everything better, but also not trying to make us miss a day or skip a scene. You know, there's like a way to, you get into a rhythm on a film where you go like, it's this size film, we have this much time to talk about it, and then we have to do it. And on bigger films, you know, you just all sort of sit around and you get lazy and there's no reason to figure anything out because you have all the time in the world. But on this one, you really had to show up and it was like game day kind of all the time, which I really like. So I guess I was an athlete. I know what game day feels like.
I love being in the weeds with writers and directors, and I was on set every day, and I love that part. I love filmmaking. I could point. I think we could all point to little things that like, oh, I remember the impression I made there. But I think everyone who worked on this movie can say that. From our PAs to, I think everyone gave everything they had to this movie. And so, I don't know that there's any one thing. I mean, this is certainly Tim's directorial voice. But the beautiful thing about Inside the Intensity that Peter definitely describes about Tim, he's also loving and welcoming and wants everyone to feel heard and embraced, and through the lens of his vision. But so I think this is every single person you saw in those credits. Like, this is really all of those people's movie in that way.
Yeah, and he had
I feel like sometimes my job is to burst people's bubble. Yeah, they think everything's it's a great scene. It's gonna be really awesome. You go, except big problem here. And he was always really ready for that. And I actually would call him over the weekend. We have a constant communication going on where I do a lot of that. I do a lot of like, no, nope, red line through that part. Like I'm just talking about, I feel like it's my job as the person on the ground who has to go in there to report back what doesn't work.
Actually, just one last follow-up. Did doing this movie change any perspective that you had initially on that day? That's something that like you learned, anything just new to the process, or obviously it's always a terrible day, but is there something that you learned in doing this movie that?
For me, it was I was not alive when this happened, but I know a lot about it. I've seen One Day in September, the Oscar-winning documentary Kevin McDonald directed, and I've seen Munich, which isn't so much about the day, but what happened after this day. the thing that I took away from this, and still even as I was sitting watching tonight, I'm like, we just assume that people, professional people, whether they're law enforcement or journalists or athletes, like, know what they're doing and they got it under control. And I really, from this incident, and this, not just what happens in the movie, but the whole day, like, how just no one had any idea what the hell was going on. And they were all, doing their best, and it ended up kind of failing spectacularly by the end. But that's the one thing, I mean, it's not an uplifting message to end the night on, but I took away just like, wow, like, sometimes just the perfect storm happens and nobody knows what they're doing.
To me, the two pieces of documentary footage, one of the German official who's having some kind of cognitive dissonance happen where I don't even know what's going on with him, but I recognize it. It's like the way I've been around some of my relatives. And then Jim McKay, who when I watch it, it actually really moves me every time I see it, because he doesn't make it about himself. It's like you hear so many people in the news these days where they'll describe some incident and their emotionality or their feelings about it are what they're communicating mostly. And I really like that he's just trying to give us the information,